everyone. Welcome to another episode of Lit. Why am I echoing? Lit with Lenin Reloaded.
You should be all right.
Okay, well,
I think it just came up on the YouTube late.
Lenin Reloaded. So, before we get started with Lenin, we have to. Do I have lipstick on? Yeah, I do.
We're a little chaotic this afternoon, I guess, or evening. I said we're a little chaotic this afternoon or evening.
Maybe
it wasn't starting like right up on YouTube, but it's up there now, so we're good.
Yeah, we'll just wait for a second for people to come.
Yeah, so
because right now it's just me.
Yeah. How did So the big they don't do they do a big May Day in Russia, or do they?
Yeah, May Day is a national holiday. Everyone gets a day off.
Mm-hmm.
And then 9th of May is another big holiday.
Yeah, you do the victory.
Yeah, the parade and things like that.
Yeah.
Do we have anyone yet, or should we just
I'm only seeing. Yeah, I'm not seeing people in here yet. So
we'll just wait a minute.
Yeah, let me share it out on here.
Why can't? Yeah, exactly.
So I'm just gonna say we're live.
So do we have somebody, or is it just me twice?
No, it's probably you and me. It's probably
we have Rick Solis. Okay, hello, Rick Solis. Let's get started.
Hello, Rick. Okay, let's get started.
Okay. So 9th of May is Victory Day, which celebrates the capitulation of fascist Germany to the Allies.
Yeah.
But the thing about it is that 3 of the 4 allies didn't actually fight Hitler.
No, they were not in there. They were not liberating Germany at the time and all that. So
I mean, we read an article about this a long time ago. So in the Western Zone, basically they wouldn't let the in the Eastern Zone it was easy. What they did was everyone who was not a fascist united under one ticket, and they had an election, and the not fascists won. But in the Western Zone, they wouldn't let the Communist Party form, which was the only party that fought Hitler. And then what happened is that in the first election, they accidentally elected moderate neo-Nazis, according to the New York Times. And then it was so embarrassing that they kind of had to create this like really clunky constitution. But in the end, West Germany had higher percentage of Nazi judges than Adolf Hitler. And for the most part, the U.S. just kind of and then there's, of course, the rat lines that smuggled blood. They saw the victims starving and all this, and then they decided, hey, this is better than communists who want to divide up farmlands.
Yeah. It's to try to equate the two, even before, but since then has been just
a project. And that's why they harp about the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. But if you look at Hitler's very first speech, his main enemy is communism. Every speech. So it's obvious that the Soviet Union wasn't uniting with Hitler, but they were just buying themselves more time to move their industries out east so that they wouldn't be the first targets of Nazi Germany.
Yeah. I mean, they were still trying to build up their country from out of feudalism and all the crap the Tsar was doing. So like they didn't need they didn't need, obviously Hitler wanted to go after them. Obviously.
That was their main target. And if you look at this, like for example, France capitulated in my according to me, the elites did this on purpose because back in 1936 they had elected a socialist, and unions were very strong in France at that time. There's lots of strikes, so they were like, let's just surrender to Germany. To get rid of the unions and things like and worker protections, and so and if you see Denmark like that, like no country actually put up a fight. So actually, there's a really good book written by a former member of the U.S. State Department called "The Great Conspiracy Against Soviet Russia."
Mm-hmm.
Everyone cries about the Stalinist purges; they purged these people, and basically, the State Department explains that because of these purges, the Soviet Union was able to withstand Nazi Germany.
Mm-hmm.
The Czechoslovakia didn't do these purges, and basically Sudeten Germans who aligned with the Nazis ended up like betraying the country, and so on and so forth. So it's like a narrative built after by the guilty to actually char the innocent, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah.
Let's look at Trump's latest tweet in this long line of stolen valor.
Okay. There you go. So many of our allies and friends, unless you want to try to do a Trump voice.
Yeah, I'll do it. Okay. I can't do the Trump voice, god damn it. Many of our allies and friends, okay, we're going to build those bridges. We're going to build those walls and make Mexico pay for it. Okay, that's not a Trump voice.
You've been out of New York too long.
I used to be able to do the Trump voice.
I know. All right.
Many of our allies and friends are celebrating May 8th as Victory Day. It's actually May 9th, but whatever. But we did more than any other country by far in producing a victorious result on World War I. That's also a bad grammar, but let's ignore that. I am hereby renaming May 8th as Victory Day for World War II and November 11th as Victory Day for World War I. We won both wars. Nobody was close to us in terms of strength, bravery, or military brilliance, but we never celebrate anything. That's because we don't have leaders anymore that know how to do so. We're going to start celebrating our victories again.
Our victories again.
Okay, this is not, who is our, come on. Okay. So first of all, 80% of all the battles were fought on the Eastern Front, which the U.S. did jack squat. 85% of the Nazi soldiers were killed by either Soviets or the partisans in the Eastern Front. The Soviet Union lost 27 million people to World War II. Mm-hmm. The U.S. lost about 200,000.
Yep.
In fact, the U.S. dropped more bombs in Laos than they did in the entire World War II theater, which shows you they were not really that serious about it. They were just kind of hanging out to see who wins and then kind of trying to be on the side.
Yeah.
And then if you notice, D-Day is June 4th, 1944. So from Normandy to Victory Day, which is May 9th, 1945, look at how far they traveled. Not from Normandy just to like somewhere near Dusseldorf.
Yeah.
Bern, Bonn, something like that. But the Soviets at the same time went from basically Leningrad, all the way to Berlin, which is much farther. So they ended up liberating Belarus, Ukraine, Romania, Hungary, Austria, Poland. I'm forgetting Bulgaria. Not in this order, right? Because Bulgaria came after Romania. And then they traveled and traveled and traveled. So, which shows you like what the hell were they doing for about a year, for an almost entire year, like just hanging out in France?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So it was, and their quote unquote liberation wasn't really liberation because they ended up aligning with Nazis.
They saved a lot of them.
Yeah, they did.
They made sure that they could move into other places. Some of them.
They created the rat lines. So I was reading this book recently. So there was so first of all, it's funny how the West is like prides themselves that Nazis felt safer surrendering themselves to US and UK instead of the Soviet Union.
Yeah.
That's because they created a Nazi safe space.
Yeah.
So so there's a Ukrainian Patriotic Army, UPA, who are horrible Nazi collaborators. In fact, you have complaints from Wehrmacht officers to Himmler saying these people are savages. They're like being too brutal. They're disgusting. And the U.S. Actually, before the war ended, they sent liaisons over and basically imported all these people from the UPA over to the West as kind of like, and then used them for intelligence operations for anti-communist purposes in Latin America, Asia, and in Eastern Europe.
Yeah.
So they weren't even that serious about killing the Nazis.
Hold on 1 second. What are the cards you're playing with?
Some random business cards.
Oh, okay. I didn't want them to be like credit cards and you'd be floating them around with numbers.
No, this is for the International Friendship Association.
Oh, okay. All right. That's a good one to show.
And this is for a history professor.
Oh, okay. Good. All right. That's okay. I was watching them. I go, that looked like a credit card. Like I didn't want you to be showing a credit card. Sorry.
No, I'm not showing my credit cards. I'm just randomly playing with cards that were in my purse.
All right. So we were on
U.S. not being half-assed about Nazis.
Yeah.
So, but then the U.S. kind of has to pretend. Like, I mean, if there is a war where the U.S. were not the brutalizers, this is kind of the one minor righteous war that they can claim. So they kind of have to pretend that their role was bigger than it actually was. In fact, the first until 1944, if you look at American newspapers, they call it the German-Soviet War, not World War II.
Yeah.
Yeah. So these horrible Nazi collaborators were then moved to the West to Brazil, Argentina, Bolivia, and so on and so forth. So they aligned with Nazis after the war. And if you look at American newspapers at that time, they were not really opposed. And you know how the New York Times and William Hearst presses basically repeat State Department propaganda.
Mm-hmm.
So they were not really anti-Nazis. I mean, the New York Times praised Action T4 as like a good economical program.
Yeah.
And they called Mussolini a new hope.
Do you want to see the from?
Yes, let's see the from tweet.
Okay, let's hold on. I just have to go to it. All right. There we go.
Nazi Germany surrendered in May 1945. For Americans, the second war would rage 3 more months until VJ Day in August. But for Russians and those influenced by them, Victory Day falls in May. Trump follows the Russian practice, not the American. Okay. So Japan was occupying Manchuria. Who liberated Manchuria?
The communists and Russia helped.
No, it was basically the Soviets in conjunction with like back then Mao's army was the partisan army.
Yeah.
The U.S. How many soldiers did the U.S. send to liberate Manchuria?
I couldn't even get probably
0.
0. Okay.
Yeah, they just kind of sat in the Pacific while they were like trying to occupy the Philippines, like all these islands that Japan took over, like they were like being the new occupiers.
Mm-hmm.
And then they nuked Japan.
Yeah.
So they weren't. So even the U.S. like he's erasing basically the Soviet contribution because the Soviet went over land. Well, of course, the Mongolian army also was there. So Soviet army, Mongolian army, and the partisan Chinese army was there and then they ended up liberating the entire parts of China and down to Korea.
Yeah.
So it's like the U.S. didn't really do jack squat until they basically nuked Japan.
Yeah, and Japan was already talking about
willing to surrender. So this was the thing. The one condition is they wanted to keep the emperor, and the U.S. was like, no. But then after the after the nuking, they were like, okay, fine, you can keep the emperor, which was their original condition of surrender, which they could have followed without nuking anyone. But we all know that the nuke was a way to display the threat of the empire and what it was capable of to the third world countries.
Yeah. And VJ Day just always like. Do you know they celebrate? I live in Massachusetts, and they were celebrating that in Rhode Island. They would get the day off up until like, I don't know, within 20 years ago. They were still getting the day off for us nuking Japan. It
Yeah.
was a little disgusting.
And then if you notice, so in Korea, when in the U.S. half, they put back Japanese generals, including Shinzo Abe's grandfather, uh, and Japanese policemen who stayed in place. So it was just basically a new occupation.
Yeah.
So even this is just disgusting stolen valor.
Mm-hmm.
And if Americans want to be part of a righteous war in the future, they should not impede on the Soviet glory, but in fact try to not be horrible imperialists that
probably.
shoot Vietnamese peasants and take their ears in exchange for beers.
Yeah. All right. So you want to start reading?
Sure.
You want me to read, oh wait, I wanted you to talk a little bit about the go back to the chart that he's going to talk about in section 6. So that's
hold on. Daryl Davis says all true. Yugoslavia, Albania, France, and Italy are without data. That's because Italy mostly liberated itself with the Italian partisans. Yugoslavia almost 90% liberated itself, and Albania too.
Oops, that wasn't the one. I just showed the wrong one. Sorry. But yeah. Did you want to go through any more of those?
No, this is good.
Okay.
Hey, and Nashoba Chomak Shuti. Okay, were we in section 5 or 6?
We are on section 6, but section 6 opens up with let's look at the from the table
from last time.
So can you just look at the table from last time on section 5?
Basically, Lenin shows that if you have like 5 people producing 5 goods, you have something, but then if like one competitor takes over the production, then it shows you like how basically all the money just travels into that one person with the monopoly.
Okay. Do you want to read or you want me to read?
I'll read.
Okay.
Let us now draw the conclusions which follow the above table. The first conclusion is that the concept market is quite inseparable from the concept of the social division of labor. That general basis of all commodity and consequently, let us add, of capitalist production, as Marx calls it. The market arises where, to the extent that social division of labor and commodity production appear. So social division of labor is basically when you have those specializations. So when you have the miners mining and then they send the coal or to the factory to make steel. That's what he means by social division of labor.
Yeah.
The dimensions of the market are with the degree of specialization of social labor. It is a commodity cannot acquire properties of a socially recognized universal equivalent except being converted into money. That money, however, is in someone else's pocket. In order to entice the money out of pocket, our friend's commodity must, above all things, be a use value to the owner of the money. For this, it is necessary that the labor expended upon it be of a kind that is socially useful, of a kind that constitutes a branch of social division of labor. But division of labor is a system of production which has grown up spontaneously and continues to grow behind the backs of the producers. The commodities to be exchanged may possibly be the product of some new kind of labor that pretends to satisfy newly arisen requirements or even to give rise itself to new requirements. Particular operation through yesterday, perhaps, forming one out of many operations conducted by one producer in creating a given commodity, may today separate itself from this connection and may establish itself as an independent branch of labor and send its incomplete product to market as an independent commodity. Thus, capital Marx. Thus, the limits of development of market in a capital society are set by the limitations of the specialization of social labor. But this specialization, by its very nature, is as infinite as technical developments. To increase the productivity of human labor in, for instance, the making of some part of the whole product, the production of that part must be specialized and must become a special one concerned with mass production and therefore permitting and engendering the employment of machines. That is on the one hand. On the other hand, technical progress in capitalist society consists in the socialization of labor. This socialization necessarily calls for the specialization in the various functions of the production process, for their transformation from scattered, isolated functions repeatedly, separately in every establishment engaged in this production, into socialized functions concentrated in one new establishment and calculated to satisfy the requirements of whole of society. I quote an example. Recently, in the United States, woodworking factories are becoming more and more specialized. New factories are springing up exclusively for the making of, for instance, axe handles, broom handles, or extensible tables. Machine building is making constant progress. New machines are being continuously invented to simplify and cheapen some side of production. Every branch of furniture making, for instance, has become a trade requiring special machines and special workers. In carriage buildings, wheel rims are made in special factories, Missouri, Arkansas, Tennessee. Wheel spokes are made in Indiana and Ohio, and hubs again are made in special factories in Kentucky and Illinois. All these separate parts are brought by factories which specialize in the making of whole wheels. Thus, quite a dozen factories taken part of building some kind of cheap vehicle. Mr. Tversky, 10 years in America. Vestnik, Evropu, 1893. Vestnik means vision. This shows how wrong is the assertion that the growth of the market in a capitalized society caused by the specialization of social labor must cease as soon as all natural producers become commodity producers. Russian carriage builders has long become commodity production, but wheel rims, say, are still made in every carriage builder's or wheelwright's shop. The technical level is low, the production is split up among a mass of producers. This must entail the specialization of different parts of production, their socialization, and consequently the expansion of the market. And if you look at the way the modern car is built, one part is built in China, something else is built in Mexico. And when they say made in US, they mean assembled in US.
I don't know if we seem to be lagging a lot on.
Is it my fault?
No, I don't. I'm just looking over at our YouTube and it's lagging a little bit, and it's saying the upload's fine here.
Okay, if it's lagging, it's fine. They'll just get it a few seconds after us.
Yeah.
Here, the following reservation must be made. All that has been said by no means implies a rejection of the populism, the highest stage of capitalism.
Yeah.
Under capitalist production, an equilibrium between production and consumption is achieved only by a series of fluctuations. The larger the scale of production and the wider the circle of consumers it is calculated to serve, the more violent the fluctuations are. It can be understood, therefore, that when bourgeoisie production has reached a high degree of development, it can no longer keep within the limits of the national state. Competition compels the capitalist to keep expanding production and to seek foreign markets for the mass sale of their products. Obviously, the fact that a capitalist nation must have foreign markets just as little violates the law of the market is a simple expression of the social division of labor under commodity and economy. And consequently, it can grow as infinitely as a division of labor as crises violate the law of value. Lamentations about market appeared in Russian literature only when certain branches of our capitalist production, for example, the cotton industry, had reached full development, embraced nearly the entire home market, and became concentrated in a few huge enterprises. The best proof of the material basis of idle talk and questions of market is precisely the interest of our large-scale capitalist industry. It is the fact that nobody in our literature has prophesied the ruin of our handicraft industry because of the disappearance of markets. Although the handicraft industry produces values totaling over 1,000 million rubles and supplies the very same impoverished people. Wailing about the ruin of our industry due to the shortage of markets is nothing more than a thinly disguised maneuver of our capitalists who in this way exert pressure on policy, identify in humble avowal of their impotence the interests of their pockets with the interests of the country, and are capable of making the government pursue a policy of colonial conquest, and even of involving it in war for the sake of protecting state interests. That sounds so familiar.
Yep.
The bottomless pit of Narodnik utopianism and Narodnik simplicity about the need for acceptance of this wailing about markets. These crocodile tears, quite firmly established, is already conceded bourgeoisie as proof of the impotence of Russian capitalism. So the Narodniks really wanted to kind of develop these handicraft industries and kind of skip capital industrialization. And then they had other really stupid ideas too.
I'm interested if you remember. It was crocodile tears actually like the term. Like was that a term used in Russia too?
Let me look at the original and tell you. If you continue reading, I will look at that.
Okay. So the second conclusion is that the impoverishment of the masses of the people, that indispensable point in all the neurotic arguments about the market, not only does not hinder the development of capitalism, but on the contrary, is the expression of that development, is a condition of capitalism and strengthens it. Capitalism needs the free laborer, and impoverishment consists in the petty producers being converted into wage workers. The impoverishment of the masses is accompanied by the enrichment of a few exploiters. The ruin and decline of small establishments is accompanied by the strengthening and development of bigger ones. Both processes facilitate the growth of the market. The impoverished peasant who formerly lived by his own farming now lives by earnings, i.e., by the sale of his labor power. He now has to purchase essential articles for consumption, although in a smaller quantity and an inferior quality. On the one hand, the means of production from which this peasant is freed are concentrated in the hands of a minority, are converted into capital, and the product now appears on the market. This is the only explanation of the fact that the mass expropriation of our peasantry in the post-reform epoch has been accompanied by an increase and not a decrease in the gross productivity of the country and by the growth of the home market. It is a known fact that there has been an enormous increase in the output of the big factories and works, in that there has been a considerable extension of the handicraft industries. Both work mainly for the home market. And there has been a similar increase in the amount of grain circulating in the home markets, the development of the grain trade within the country.
Okay.
Okay.
So I found it. Okay, so let me just quickly read. На путь завоевательной колониальной политики вовлечь даже его в войну ради охранения таких государственных интересов. Нужна именно вся бездонная пропасть народнического утопизма и народнической наивности, чтобы принимать вопли рынка. Это крокодиловые слезы.
Oh, да. I hear the crocodiles.
Literally use crocodile tears.
Wow. All right. So that was a saying in Russia.
Yeah, вопли окрепшей и успевшей уже зазнаться буржуазии. Yeah, he literally used crocodile tears.
All right. Do you want me to keep reading for now?
Yeah, because I don't know where you are.
Oh, I'm at the third conclusion about the significance of the.
Okay, I can read it if you want.
Okay, if you want to read.
The third conclusion about the significance of production of means of production calls for a correction to the table. As has already been stated, that table does not at all claim to depict the whole process of the development of capitalism, but only to show how the replacement of natural by commodity economy, of the latter by capitalist economy, affects the market. That is why accumulation was disregarded in the table. Actually, however, capitalist society cannot exist without accumulating, for competition compels every capitalist on pain of ruin to expand production. Such expansion of production is depicted in the table. Producer 1, for example, in the interval between third and fourth periods, expanded his output of C threefold, from 2C to 6C. Formerly, he worked alone in his workshop. Now he has 2 wage workers. Obviously, that expansion of production could not have taken place without accumulation. He had to build a special workshop for several persons to acquire implements of production on a larger scale and to purchase larger quantities of raw materials and much else. The same applies to producer 4, who expanded the production of B. This expansion of individual establishments, the concentration of production, must of necessity have entailed or increased, it makes no difference, the production of the means of production for the capitalists: machines, iron, coal. The concentration of production increased the productivity of labor, replaced hand by machine labor, and discarded certain number of workers. On the other hand, there was a development in the production of these machines and other means of production, converted by the capitalist into constant capital, which now begins to grow more rapidly than variable capital. If, for example, we compare the fourth period with the sixth, we shall find the production of the means of production has increased 50%. Because in the former cases, there are two capitalist enterprises requiring of constant capital in the latter three. By comparing this increase with the growth of production of articles of consumption, we arrive at the more rapid growth of production of the means of production mentioned above. The whole meaning and significance of this law of the more rapid growth of the means of production lies in one fact, that the replacement of hand by machine labor in general, the technical progress that accompanies machine industry, calls for intense development of the production of coal and iron, and those real means of production as means of production. It is clearly evident from the following statement that the author failed to understand the meaning of this law and has allowed schemes depicting the process to screen its real nature from him. Viewed from the side, this production of means of production as means of production seems absolutely absurd by the accumulation of money for money's sake by Tlyushkin, but was also an absolutely absurd process. Both know not what to do. That is precisely what the Narodniks try their utmost to prove, the absurdity of Russian capitalism, which they aver is ruining the people, but is not providing a higher organization of production. Of course, that is a fairy tale. There is nothing absurd in replacing hand by machine labor. On the contrary, progressive work of human technique consists precisely of this. The higher the level of technical development, the more is human hand labor ousted. Being replaced by machines of increased complexity, an ever larger place is taken in the country's total production by machines and the articles needed for their manufacture. These three conclusions must be supplemented by two further remarks. Firstly, what has been said does not negate the contradiction in the capitalist mode of production, which Marx spoke of in the following words. Laborers as buyers of commodities are important for the market, but as sellers of their own commodity, their labor power, capitalist society tends to keep them down to a minimum price. It has been shown that in capitalist society that the part of social production which produces articles of consumption must also grow. The development of production of means of production merely sets the above-mentioned contradiction aside, but it does not abolish it. It can only be eliminated with the elimination of the capitalist mode of production itself. It goes without saying, however, that it is utterly absurd to regard that contradiction as an obstacle to full development of capitalism in Russia, as the Narodniks are fond of doing. Incidentally, that is sufficiently explained by the table. Secondly, when discussing the relation between the growth of capitalism and of the market, we must not lose sight of the indubitable fact that the development of capitalism inevitably entails a rising level of requirements for the entire population, including the industrial proletariat. This rise is created in general by increasing the frequency of exchange of products, which results in more frequent contact between the inhabitants of town and country, of different geographical localities, and so forth. It is also brought by the crowding together and the concentration of their industrial proletariat, which enhances their class consciousness and a sense of human dignity, which enables them to wage a successful struggle against the predatory tendencies of the capitalist system. This law of increasing requirements has manifested itself with full force in the history of Europe. Compare, for example, the French proletariat at the end of the 18th and the end of the 19th centuries, or the British worker of the 1940s. Of the 1840s and of today. This law operates in Russia too. The rapid development of commodity economy and capitalism in post-reform epoch has given a rise to the level of requirement of the peasantry too. The peasants have begun to live cleaner life as regards to clothing, housing, and so forth. This is undoubtedly a progressive phenomenon and must be placed to the credit of Russian capitalism, and if nothing else, if proved by the generally known fact. Noted by all the investigators of our village handicrafts and the peasant economy in general, that the peasants of the industrial localities live far cleaner lives than the peasant engaged in agriculture and hardly touched by capitalism. Of course, that phenomenon is manifested primarily and most readily in the adoption of purely outward, ostentatious aspect of civilization. But only errant reactionaries like Mr. Vivi are capable of bewailing it and see it as nothing but decline.
Yeah. So there was something that comes up in that, and like I'm just thinking of like some conversations you have with the free market people, and within this text they're talking about how, you know, the little guy has to, like, the big guy takes over the little guy, and that's what you like. They're all like, if everyone just had a business.
Well, no, and the thing about it is that it is always related to how closely related you are to the King of England. So basically, you can't. There is no free market without the government. Like, there's no market. Like, the government creates the market, and the big guy is basically the person who's like some sort of nobility or some sort of relative of the leader.
Yeah.
They don't actually do a historical analysis. It's kind of like their theory.
Yeah, I mean, and caps are even
stupider. Yeah.
All right. Do you want me to?
Yeah, there was one where Ben Praxis. I have a video way back when, where he talks about for-profit fire departments, and it's like, I think that was debunked in ancient Rome with Marcus Crassus, because he kept on setting fire because he kept on getting money for each fire he put out.
Yeah.
Conclusion, it will perhaps be worthwhile to illustrate the disputed issue, which I think is overburdened with abstractions, diagrams, and formula, by an examination of the argument advanced by one of the latest and most prominent representatives of the current view. I am referring to Mr. Nikolai An. Let me see who that is. Okay, we don't know. It's his pseudonym, I guess. He regards as the greatest obstacle to the development of capitalism in Russia the contradiction of the home market and the diminution of the purchasing power of the peasants.
Where are you reading from?
Chapter 7? No, chapter... Oh, it's chapter 8. Oh, I'm so sorry.
Yeah, you skipped chapter 7.
To understand what, in fact, the market question consists of, it is best to compare the Narodnik and Marxist conceptions of the process illustrated by the diagram, showing the exchange between the capitalist A and the direct producers of CRW and by the table, showing the conversion of natural economy of 6 producers into capitalist economy. If we take the diagram, we get no explanation at all. Why does capitalism develop? Where did it come from? It is represented as a sort of accident. Its emergence is attributed either to we took the wrong road or to implementation by authorities. Why do the masses become impoverished? This again is not answered by the diagram. In this place of an answer, Narodniks dispose of the matter with a sentimental phrase about a time-hallowed system deviation from the true path, which is similar nonsense, which the celebrated subjective mood in sociology is so good at inventing. The inability to explain capitalism and the preference for utopias instead of a study and elucidation of reality lead to a denial of the significance and strength of capitalism. It is like a hopeless invalid who has no source from which to draw the strength for development. We shall introduce into the condition of that invalid a significant, almost impalpable improvements if we say he can develop by producing means of production as means of production. That requires the technical development of capitalism, and we see that precisely this development is lacking. For that capitalism must embrace the whole country, but we see that this is not possible for the development of capitalism to become universal. If, however, we take the table, neither the development of capitalism nor the impoverishment of the people will appear to be accidental. They are necessary concomitants of the growth of commodity production based on the division of social labor. The question of market is entirely eliminated because the market is nothing other than the expression of that division of labor and commodity production. The development of capitalism is now not seen as a possibility, something the author of the paper would at best have proved, but also as a necessity, because once social economy is based on a division of labor, the commodity form of the product technical progress must inevitably lead to the strengthening and deepening of capitalism. The question now arises.
That word concomitance is a phenomenon that naturally accompanies or follows something. That's all it means. I've never heard that word before.
By the fact of the contemporary Russian economic reality. The pivot of the table is a transition from commodity to capitalist economy, the differentiation of the commodity producers into capitalists and proletarians. If we turn into the phenomenon of the contemporary social economy of Russia, we shall see that the foremost of them is precisely the differentiation of our small producers. If we take the peasant agriculturist, we shall find on the one hand, masses of peasants are giving up their land, losing economic independence and turning into proletarians. On the other hand, peasants continually enlarging their crop areas and adopting improved farming methods. On the one hand, peasants are losing farm properties, livestock, and implements, and on the other hand, peasants are acquiring improved implements and are beginning to procure missions and so forth. On the one hand, peasants are giving up their land, selling or leasing their allotments, and on the other hand, peasants are renting allotments and are greedily buying privately owned lands. All these are commonly known facts, established long ago, the only explanation of which lies in the laws of commodity economy, which splits our community peasants into bourgeoisie and the proletariat. Mm-hmm. If we take the village handicraftsman, we shall find that in the post-reform epoch, not only have new industries emerged and the old ones developed more rapidly, the results of the differentiation of the agricultural peasantry just mentioned, the result of the progressing social division of labor. But in addition, the mass of handicraftsmen have been growing poorer and poorer and sinking into dire poverty and losing economic independence, while an insignificant minority have been growing rich at the expense of that mass, accumulating vast amounts of capital and turning into buyers up, monopolizing the market, and in the overwhelming majority of our handicraft industries have in the end organized a completely capitalist domestic system of large-scale production.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Do you want me to read a little bit?
Sure.
All right. The existence of these two polarizing trends among our petty producers clearly shows that capitalism and mass impoverishment, far from precluding, actually condition each other, and irrefutably proves that capitalism is already the main background of the economic life of Russia. So, like Lenin is saying that capitalism's already there, right? So it's
emerging.
Yeah. So that is why it will be no paradox to say that the fact of the breakup of the peasantry provides the answer to the question of markets. One cannot help noting also that the very current presentation of the notorious market question harbors a number of absurdities. The usual formula, see section 1, is based on the most incredible assumptions that the economic system of society can be built or destroyed at the will of some group of persons, quote unquote intellectuals, or the quote unquote government. Otherwise, the question could not be raised: can capitalism develop? Must Russia pass through capitalism? Should the village community be preserved? And so forth. That capitalism precludes the impoverishment of the people, that the market is something separate from the independent of capitalism, some special condition for its development. Unless these absurdities are corrected, the question cannot be answered. And
should the village, obviously, should the village community where peasants are doing this for 8 hours a day, when you can have just a tractor do that, no, it shouldn't.
yeah and then but there's always like that is one of the contradictions too. You talk about having immigrants doing the farm work here or something like that. It's they're taking our jobs, but it's do you know what I mean? If we automated most of that stuff, the jobs wouldn't be those tough jobs wouldn't be either. You know what I mean?
Exactly. And actually, Lenin later talks about immigration, has a great piece about this, which talks about capitalism and immigration. Mm-hmm. He actually explains why they must always need immigrant labor. But it's basically because they don't have labor unions in the U.S. and they can underpay undocumented immigrants beneath market wages.
Yep. So, indeed, let us imagine that an answer to the question, can capitalism develop in Russia when the masses of the people are poor and are becoming still poorer?
Isn't that the point of capitalism?
I know. Like, it makes people poorer. So I don't,
Yeah.
Somebody would say the following: yes, it can, because capitalism will develop not on account of articles of consumption, but on account of means of production. Obviously, such an answer is based on the absolutely correct idea that the total productivity of a capitalist nation increases chiefly on the account of means of production, i.e., more on the account of means of production than of articles of consumption. But it is still more obvious that such an answer cannot advance the solution of the question one iota, just as you cannot draw a correct conclusion from a syllogism. I don't know what that word is.
Philology.
Syllogism with a correct minor premise, but an absurd major premise. Such an answer, I repeat, already presupposes that capitalism is developing, is embracing the whole country, passing to the higher technical stage, large-scale machine industry, whereas the question itself is based on the denial of the possibility of capitalism developing and of small-scale production being replaced by large-scale production. The market question must be removed from the sphere of fruitless speculation about possibility and necessity to the solid ground of reality, that of studying and explaining what shape the Russian economic order is taking and why it is taking that shape and no other. I shall confine myself to quoting some examples from the material in my possession in order to show concretely on what data this proposition is based. To illustrate the differentiation of the small producers and the fact that not only a process of impoverishment, but also of the creation of large-scale, relatively bourgeois economy is taking place among them, I shall quote data for 3 purely agricultural uyezds in different gubernias of European Russian.
Yeah. So this one, it's not all in the Donbass area. So he goes to Samara and Sarah. So Taurida is in the Ukraine area. Samara is like much more southern, and eastern, and Saratov is also a little bit southern.
Yeah. So the Dnieper uyezd in Taurida gubernia, the
Novozensk uyezd in Samara gubernia, and Kamushin
uyezd in the Saratov gubernia. The data are taken from Zemstvo statistical abstract.
Yeah. So Zemstvo is like this board of like people who quote unquote regulated the land, and I guess I don't know what they did besides printing these statistical abstracts. Actually,
That's their whole purpose, to forestall possible statements that the uyezd chosen are not typical in our outlying regions, which hardly experienced serfdom and largely became populated only under post-reform free conditions. Differentiation has indeed made more rapid strides than at the center. Let me say the following. Number 1. Of the 3 mainland uyezds of Taurida gubernia, I have chosen Dnieper uyezd because it is wholly Russian. 0.6% are colonist farms, and it is inhabited by community peasants. Number 2, for the Novozensk uyezd, the data concern only the Russian community population. See statistical returns for Novozensk and do not include the so-called farmstead peasants, i.e. the community peasants who have left the community and have settled separately on purchased or rented land. The addition of these direct representatives of capitalist farming would show an even greater differentiation. For Kamushin uyezd, the data concerned only the Great Russian community population. The classification is in the abstracts is for Dnieper uyezd according to desatines of crop area per household. For the other,
So basically, the poor group owns 11% of the land, middle group owns 43%, and the rich group owns 46%. But the rich group only makes up 18% of the population, and it's the same for roughly the same for the well, in Novozemsk, the rich group makes up 25% of the population, owns 63% of the land, so it's similar.
Okay. So the poor groups include households in Dnipro, Uyezd, cultivating no land and with crop areas of up to 10 desatines per household. In Novozensk, in Kamyshin, Uyezd, households having no draft animals or one. The middle group includes households in Dnipro, Uyezd, having from 10 to 25 desatines of crop area. In Novozensk, Uyezd, households having from 2 to 4 draft animals. In Kamyshin, Uyezd, households having from 2 to 3 draft animals. The prosperous group includes households having over 25 desatines, Dnipro, Uyezd, or having more than 4 draft animals, Novozensk and Uyezd, and more than 3 in the Kamyshin, Uyezd. From these data, it is quite evident that the process going on among our agricultural and community peasants is not one of impoverishment and ruin in general, but a process of splitting into bourgeoisie and a proletariat. A vast mass of peasants, the poor group, about a half on the average, are losing economic independence. They now have only an insignificant part of the total farming of the local peasants, some 13% on the average of the crop area, and area under crops is 3 to 4 desatines per household, which is, as we discussed before, how many desatines?
A little over. 1 desatine is a little bigger than an acre.
Yeah, but
18 desatines to feed your family.
So not even enough to take care of themselves. So to show what such a crop area means, let me say that in Tarita Gubernia, for a peasant household to subsist exclusively by independent farming, now he says it without resorting to so-called outside employments, it must have 17 to 18 desatines. I don't know why I asked you these questions, because he always answers them right after I ask them.
That's the thing about Lenin, is that everything, if you wait, he'll always answer them.
Obviously, the members of the bottom group already subsist far less by their farming than by outside employment, i.e. the sale of their labor power. And if we turn to more detailed data characterizing the conditions of the peasants in this group, we shall see that precisely this group provides the largest contingent of those who give up their farming, lease their allotments, have no working implements, and seek employment elsewhere. The peasants in this group represent our rural proletariat. But on the other hand, from among these very same community peasants, quite another group of an entirely opposite character is emerging. The peasants in the top group have crop areas 7 to 10 times larger than those in the peasants in the bottom group. If we compare these crop areas, 23 to 40 desatines per household, with the normal number of desatines under crops that a family needs in order to live comfortably by its farming alone, we shall find that they are double or treble that amount. Obviously, these peasants already engage in agriculture to obtain an income to trade in grain. They accumulate considerable savings and use them to improve their farm and farming methods. For example, they buy agricultural machines and improve implements. In Novozensk, Uyezd, as a whole, for instance, 14% of the householders have improved agricultural implements. Of the peasants in the top group, 42% of the householders have improved implements, so that the peasants in the top group account for 75% of the total number of households in the Uyezd possessing improved agricultural implements. And concentrate in their hands 82% of the total improved implements owned by the peasantry. The peasants in the top group can no longer manage their crop sowing with their own labor force, and therefore resort to hiring of workers. For example, in Novozensk, Uyezd, 35% of householders in the top group employ regular wage workers, not counting those hired, for instance, for the harvesting, etc. So these are people that are constantly there. right?
Yeah.
Them. It is the same in Dnieper Uezd. In short, the peasants in the top group undoubtedly constitute a bourgeoisie. Their strength now is not based on plundering other producers, as is the strength of the usurers and kulaks.
So
But
basically, what he means is, so the way the kulak would work is, hey, I will rent you my cow, and you have to give me 1/3 of the crops you raise after I, or whatever, some crazy number, or give me more of it. So that's plundering of other producers. But
Yeah.
instead, they're like, hey, I'll pay you slave wages, and then you sow my crops for me. You're not getting any percentage if you're just getting like, I don't know, 10 rubles
Yeah.
or whatever.
You're
Yeah,
getting what I give you, and you're sowing the crops, and then you have to go and buy your own food too. So
yeah.
But on the independent organization of production, in the hands of this group, which constitutes only 1/5 of the peasantry, is concentrated more than 1/2 of the total crop area. I take the general average area for all three UIs. If we bear in mind that the productivity of labor, i.e. the harvest, of these peasants is immeasurably higher than that of the ground-scratching proletarians in the bottom group, we cannot but draw the conclusion that the chief motive force in grain production is the rural bourgeoisie. What influence was this splitting of the peasantry into a bourgeoisie and a proletariat? The Narodniks see nothing in this process but the impoverishment of the masses. I bound to have on the size of the market, i.e. on the proportion of grain that is converted into commodity. Obviously, that proportion was bound to grow considerably because the massive grain possessed by the peasants in the top group far exceeded their own needs and went to the market. On the other hand, the members on the bottom group had to buy extra grain with money earned by outside work.
And I'll be Postnikov again. Go ahead.
Okay. To quote exact data on this point, we must now turn not to Zemsto statistical abstracts, but to V.Y. Postnikov's book, Peasant Farming in South Russia. Using Zemsko statistical data, Postnikov describes peasant farming in the three mainland uyezds of Taurida gubernia,
Verdansk, Melitopol, and Dnieper.
Okay, and analysis that farming according to different groups of peasants divided into 6 categories according to crop area. 1, cultivating no land. 2, cultivating up to 5 desitines. 3, from 5 to 10 desitines.
And 4, only 4 and above can feed their, oh no, half of 4 and above can feed their families.
Yeah. 4 is 10 to 25. 5 is 25 to 50 desitines. 6 is over 50 desitines. Investigating the relation of the different groups to the market, the author divides the crop area of each farm into the following 4 parts. 1, the farm service area, as Postnikov calls the part of the crop area which provides the seeds necessary for sowing. 2, the food area provides grain for the subsistence of the family and laborers. 3, the fodder area provides fodder for the draft animals. And lastly, 4, the commercial or market area provides the product which is converted into commodity and disposed of on the market. It goes without saying that only the last area provides income in cash, whereas the others yield it in kind, i.e. provide a product that is consumed on the farm. Calculating the size of each of these plots in a different crop area groups of the peasantry, Postnikov presents the following table.
So the negative 39 means they have to go buy commercial products? That's kind of...
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right.
Go ahead. Postnikov does not give the penultimate column. I compiled it myself. Postnikov calculates the cash income on the assumption that the entire commercial area is planted to wheat and taking the average yield and the average price of grain. We see from these data that the bigger the farm, the more it assumes a commodity character, and the larger is the proportion of grain grown for sale. 12, 36, 52, 61, according to the group. The principal grain growers, the peasants in the top 2 groups, they have more than half the total area under crops, sell more than half of their agricultural product, 52 and 61. If the peasantry were not split up into bourgeoisie and the proletariat, if, in other words, the area under crops were divided among all peasants equally, all of them would belong to the middle group, cultivating 10 to 15 dесятins, and only 36% of the total grain. The product of 518,136 dесятins of crop area, 36% of the 1,439,262, would appear on the market. But now, as can be seen from the table, 42% of the total grain, the product of 608,869 dесятins, goes to market. Thus, the impoverishment of the masses, the complete decline of farms of 40% of these peasants, the poor group, those cultivating up to 10 dесятins, the formation of the rural proletariats have led to the produce of 90,000 dесятins of land under crops being thrown onto the market. I do not want to say that the growth of the market as a consequence of differentiation of peasantry were limited only to this. Far from it. We have seen, for example, that peasants acquire improved implements, turn their savings to production of means of production. We have seen that in addition to the grain, another commodity, human labor power, has come onto market. I do not refer to this only because I have quoted this example for a narrow specific purpose, but to show that here in Russia, the impoverishment of the masses is actually leading to the strengthening of a commodity and capitalist economy. I deliberately choose a product like grain, which everywhere and always is the last and slowest to be drawn into the commodity circulation. And that is why I took exclusively agricultural locality. Now I take another example relating to the purely industrial area of Moscow gubernia. Peasant farming described by Zemstvo Statistics as of volume 6 and 7 of Statistical Returns of Moscow gubernia, which contain a number of excellent essays on the handicraft industries. I shall confine myself to quoting one passage from the essay on the lace industry, which explains how and why the post-reform epoch saw a particularly rapid development of peasant handicraft. The lace industry arose in the 1820s of the present century in two neighboring villages of Voronova Volytsk and Poldosk Uyezd. In 1840, it began to spread slowly to other nearby villages, although it did not yet cover the big area. But beginning with the 60s and especially during the last 3 or 4 years, it has rapidly spread to the surrounding countryside. Of the 32 villages in which this industry is practiced at present, 2 villages in 1820 and so on, if we investigate the causes of this phenomenon, the authors of this essay, i.e. the extremely rapid spread of industry precisely in the last few years, we shall find that on the one hand, during the period, the peasants' living conditions greatly deteriorated. On the other hand, that the requirements of a population, that part of it which is in more favorable circumstances, considerably increased. The confirmation of this, the author borrows from the Moscow Zemstvo statistic the following data, which I give from in the form of a table. These figures, continues the author, are eloquent proof that the total number of horses, cows, and small livestock in that Volytsk increased, but this increased prosperity fell to the lot of certain individuals, namely the category of householders owning 2 to 3 or more horses. Consequently, we see that side by side with an increase in the number of peasants who have neither horses nor cows, there is an increase in the number of those who stop cultivating their land. They have no animals and therefore not enough manure. The land becomes exhausted and it is not worth tilling. To get food for themselves and their family, to avert starvation, it is not enough for the males alone to engage in some industry. They did that previously, when they were free from farm work. Now other members of the family must also seek outside employment. So when you can see, it increases in between those 6 years, 7 years, 8 years. The figures we gave in those tables showed us something else. In those villages, there was also an increase in the number of people having 2 to 3 cows or horses or cows. Consequently, the prosperity of those peasants increased, and yet at the same time, we said that all women and children in such and such village engage in industry. How is this to be explained? To explain this phenomenon, we must see what sort of life is lived in those villages and become more closely acquainted with their domestic conditions, and then perhaps ascertain what accounts for this strong urge to produce goods for the market. We shall not, of course, stop here to investigate in detail under what fortunate circumstance there is gradually emerged from the peasants' population stronger individuals, stronger families, What conditions give rise to the prosperity, and what social conditions enable that prosperity, once it has appeared, to grow rapidly and cause it to grow to such an extent as to considerably distinguish one section of the village inhabitants from the other. To follow this process, it is sufficient to point to one of the most ordinary occurrences in a peasant village. In a village, a certain peasant is reputed among his fellow villagers to be healthy, strong, sober working man. He has a large family, mostly sons, also distinguished for their physical strength and good traits. They all live together. There's no dividing up. They get an allotment for 4 to 5 persons. It does not, of course, require the labor of all the members of the family to cultivate it. And so 2 or 3 of the sons regularly engage in outside or local industry, and they'd only during the haymaking season do they drop the industry for a short time and help the family with the field work. The individual members of the family do not keep their earnings but pool them. Given other favorable circumstances, the combined income considerably exceeds the expenditure necessary to satisfy the family's requirement. Money is saved, and as a consequence, the family is able to engage in industry under better conditions. It can buy raw materials for cash at first hand. It can sell goods produced when they fetch a good price. It can dispense with the services of all kinds of hirers out of labor, men and women dealers, and so forth. It becomes possible to hire a worker or to give work to be done at home by poor peasants who have lost the possibility of doing any job quite independently. Due to these circumstances, the strong families we have mentioned is able to obtain profit not only from its own labor. We are not speaking here, of course, of cases where individuals known as kulaks, sharks, emerge from these families. We are examining the most ordinary occurrences among the peasant population. The tables of Volume 2 of the abstract in Part 1 and Volume 6 clearly show that the conditions of one section of the peasantry grow worse. In the majority of cases, there is an increase in the prosperity of the other smaller section or of individual members. As the industrial occupation spreads, intercourse with the world outside, with the town, in this case with Moscow, becomes more frequent. Some of the Moscow customs gradually penetrate into the village and are met with fine at first precisely in these most prosperous families. They buy samovars. Oh, actually, it's kind of funny. Samam in Russian means self. Varit means to boil. So samovar literally means self-boiling. Yeah. Samovars. I lost myself. Table crockery. They buy glass and wear neater clothes. Whereas at first, this neatness of clothing takes the shape among men of boots in place of those bast shoes. Among the women, leather shoes and boots are the crowning glory, so to speak, of neater clothing. They prefer bright, motley calicos and kerchiefs, figured woolen shawls, and similar charms. In the peasant family, it has been the custom for ages for the wife to clothe her husband, herself, and the children. As long as they grew their own flax, less money had to be spent on the purchase of cloth and other materials required for clothing. This money was obtained from the sale of poultry, eggs, mushrooms, berries, a spare skin of yarn, and a piece of linen. All the rest was made at home. It was such circumstances that the domestic production of all articles which the peasant women were expected to make, and the fact that they spent it on all the time, they had free from field work, that explain in present case. The extremely slow development of the lace industry in the villages of Voronovo Volos. Lace was made mainly by the young women of the more prosperous and of the larger families, where it was not necessary for all women to spin flax or weave linen. But the cheap calico gradually begins to oust the linen, and to this other circumstances were added. Either the flax crop failed, or the wife wanted to make her husband a red calico shirt and herself a smarter dress. So the custom of weaving various sorts of linen and kerchiefs at home for peasant clothing gradually died out or becomes very restricted. That the clothing itself underwent a change, partly because homespun cloth was displaced by factory cloth. That explains why the majority of the population do all they can to make articles for sale, even put their children to this work. This artless narrative of a careful observer shows how the process of the division of social labor takes place among our peasant masses, and how it leads to the enhancement of commodity production, and consequently of the market, and how this commodity production itself, by virtue of the very relations in which it places the producer to the market, leads to the purchase and sale of labor power becoming a most ordinary occurrence. Can we take a 2-minute bathroom break before we start the next section? You're muted, Janet.
Sorry, sure. Take a little break. That's fine. I can.
Can you entertain them for just a minute?
I can try. I'll try my hardest to entertain people. So, Final Force was asking me to put up the Parenti stuff link. So I'll just explain what I'm doing there. I'm doing similar to what this is. Like I actually took from from Esha doing these reads and discuss on Lenin that we always did. So I'm currently doing Democracy for the Few, the 9th edition, the last one that was out in 2010. And what I do is like I actually have Speechify read it, so it's a little messy, but Speechify reads it out, and then I just go off of that section and I don't know, just update it with some updated stories, or just discuss it more, or try to slip in some theory and stuff like that, especially when it's kind of good in the Democracy for a Few. Parenti actually brings up Marx a few times, so I'm able to sneak that in there. So yeah, so I've been doing that. I was doing it 2 days a week, but I was finding out like I had it like Tuesdays and Thursdays. Then like Thursdays, I was kind of not having enough time. I felt like to get it together, so I'm dropping it down to once a week, Tuesday nights, but I'll have them up every Wednesday. So chapter 9 will go up tomorrow, and then it'll just go every Wednesday after that.
Democracy for the Few?
Yeah. So yeah, I decided to just go to once a week because I was trying to do it twice a week, but I was kind of skimping on the second one because I would put a lot of time in the first one, and then I would only have a couple of days to really, really research what I wanted to say for the second one. So,
okay. By the way, Daryl Davis, I misunderstood him. Okay, right. So basically, he's saying that if France and Italy didn't have the U.S. like reinstating Nazis and enacting neoliberalism, they would have been more like Albania and Yugoslavia.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Albania basically cured like its illiteracy and like that. And they used to be like one university, and then they built hundreds of universities and lots of bunkers too.
Yeah. And it's not, I mean, once you get the population, like once you get the people to realize, okay, this is a good thing, we're going to learn, like people want to learn, you know what I mean?
Like
they want
to. I mean, people have always wanted to learn. It's just that they were slaves before. And
and they didn't have the chance to. I mean, I felt like, I always said, like, when I was working, from the time of 20 to the time, I went disabled in my 40s. So for those 20 odd years, I didn't want to read nonfiction. You know what I mean? I took some college courses and I would do it then, but it was like, I didn't want to get into theory. I would read, I hate to say this, I read romance novels.
I like romance novels. I mean, they're not bad.
So that is the thing too. You just don't, you don't have the time to actually learn what you need to learn too.
Yeah.
So it's tough.
No,
you want me?
One of my favorite authors, of course, of fiction, is Charles Dickens, because he is a very class-conscious writer.
Yeah. It's funny because we were. Was I telling you about that guy that was like all mad that the UK is teaching socialist thing because they teach this one play? They have this play that's like, oh, it's all against capitalism, and we're like, Yeah, we learned like Dickens and everything, and that's against capitalism.
Yeah, I mean, in the Christmas Carol, the factory owner is like oppressing people.
Yeah.
David Copperfield.
I'm sorry, I paid attention, and that's why I don't like capitalism. Yeah. So, do you want me to start reading 8, or?
I can do it, or you can. Yeah, I can. In conclusion, it will perhaps be worth the while to illustrate the disputed issue, which I think is overburdened with abstractions, diagram, and formula, by an examination of the argument advanced by one of the latest and most prominent representatives of the current views. Oh, by the way, Chomsky has this like most idiotic take on the Narodniks. He's like, the Narodniks had these like literature that was pretty advanced about Russia, and the Bolsheviks suppressed them. And it's like, how did the Bolsheviks, who were basically exiles, have the power to No, it was Tsar Alexander who suppressed the Narodniks. But
yeah,
That was, I'll find it. I have the clip somewhere.
Yeah,
For next
you'll
week,
have
I'll
to.
find it.
Yeah,
It's like so idiotic. He doesn't even know what the Narodniks are.
no, no.
He re- he he regards as the greatest obstacle to the development of capitalism in Russia the contraction of the home market and the diminution of the purchasing power of the peasants. The capitalization of the handicraft industries, he says, ousted the domestic production of goods. The peasants had to buy their clothing. To obtain the money for this, the peasants took to the expansion of his crop area as the allotment were inadequate, and he carried this expansion far beyond the limits of rational farming. He raised the payments for rented land to scandalous heights, and in the end, he was ruined. Capitalism dug its own grave. It brought people's economy to the frightful crisis of 1891. That was when there was a famine.
Mm-hmm.
And stopped having no ground under its feet, unable to continue along the same path. Realizing that we have departed from the time-hallowed people system, Russia is now waiting for the orders from the authorities to infuse large-scale production into the community villages. Wherein lies the absurdities of this ever new for the Russian Narodniks theory? Is it that the author fails to understand the significance of the production of means of production as means of production? Of course not. Mr. Nick On knows that the law very well even mentions that it operates in our country too. True, in view of his faculty for castigating himself with contradictions, he sometimes forgets about that law. But it is obvious that the correction of such contradictions would not in the least correct the author's main above quoted argument. The absurdity of his theory lies in his inability to explain capitalism in this country and in basing his arguments on pure fiction, which is exactly what the ANACAP libertarians do.
Exactly.
Oh, we have like a group of like, yeah, they start with like some like, and then they agree to create their own police through the non-aggression principle. And then you're like, you mean mercenaries?
Yeah, even talking to the anarchists though, like they like just the ANCOMs and stuff, they'll be like, "Oh, well, we'll have councils, and we'll have." I was like, "Okay, like
the Soviet." You know how many times? So there's this idiotic anarch, and it was like this was a few years ago. He had this like video about the state being counter-revolutionary, but his idea was to have like a council of work, and it's like so. You basically recreated the Soviet Union.
Soviets, yeah.
And it's surprising how often anarchists accidentally create the Soviet Union.
It is. It's amazing. Where are we at?
Oh, fictions. The peasantry who are ruined by the ousting of homemade products by factory-made products are regarded by Mr. Nikon as something homogeneous, internally cohesive, and reacting to all the events of life as one man. Nothing of this kind exists in reality. Commodity production could not have arisen in Russia if the productive units, the peasant households, had not existed separately. And everyone knows that actually each of our peasants conduct his farming separately and independently of his fellows. He carries on this production of products, which has become his private property at his own exclusive risk. He enters into the relation with the market on his own. Let's see how matters stand among the peasantry. Being in need of money, the peasant enlarges his crop area excessively and is like, how does he enlarge his crop area without money? Whatever. Okay. But only the prosperous peasant can enlarge his crop area, the one who has seed for sowing and sufficient quantities of livestock and implements. Such peasants, as we know, are the minority, do indeed extend their crop areas and expand their farming to such an extent that they cannot cope with it without the aid of hired laborers. Majority of peasants, however, are quite unable to meet their needs for money by expanding their farming, for they have no stocks and no sufficient means of production. Such a peasant, in order to obtain money, seeks outside employment, takes his labor power, not his product, to the market. Naturally, work away from home entails a further decline in farming, and in the end, the peasant leases his allotment to a rich fellow community member who rounds off his farm and, of course, does not himself consume the product of the rented allotment but sends it to the market. We get the impoverishment of the people, the growth of capitalism, and the expansion of the market. But that is not all. A rich peasant, fully occupied by his extended farming, can no longer produce as hitherto for his own needs. Let us say footwear. But it is more advantageous for him to buy it. As to the impoverished peasant, he too has to buy footwear. He cannot produce it on his farm for the simple reason that he no longer has one. There arises a demand for footwear and a supply of grain, produced in abundance by the enterprising peasant who touches the soul of Mr. Vivi with the progressive trend of his farming. The neighboring handicraft footwear makers find themselves in the same position as the agriculturists just described. To buy grain, of which the declining farm yields too little, production must be expanded. Again, of course, production is expanded only by the handicraftsman who has savings, the representatives of the minority. He is able to hire workers and give work out to poor peasants to be done at home. Members of the majority of the handicraftsmen, however, cannot even think of enlarging their workshops, but they are glad to get work from the moneyed buyer up. To find a purchaser of their only commodity, their labor power. Again, we get the impoverishment of the people, the growth of capitalism, and the expansion of the market. The new impetus is given to the further development and intensification of the social division of labor. Where will that movement end? Nobody can say, just as nobody can say where it began. After all, that is not important. The important thing is that we have before us a single living organic process, the process of the development of the commodity economy and the growth of capitalism. Depeasantizing in the countryside shows us the beginnings at this process, its genesis, its early stages. Large-scale capitalism in the towns shows us the end of the process, its tendency. Try to tear these phenomenon apart and try to examine them separately and independently of each other, and you will not get your argument to hang together. You will be unable to explain either one phenomenon or the either the impoverishment of the people or the growth of capitalism. However, those who advance such arguments, which have neither beginning nor end, being unable to explain the process, break off the investigation with a statement that one of the two phenomenon, equally unintelligible to them, and of course precisely the one that contradicts the morally developed sense of the critical thinking individual, is absurd, accidental, hangs in the air. In actual fact, what is hanging in the air is, of course, their own arguments.
Yeah. How were they obtaining, so how would the Kulak obtain land? They were just getting land from peasants who could not.
No. I mean, originally they were okay. So originally, So when slavery or when serfdom was officially abolished, there was the community allotment land, and then there was the landlord land, and so the landlords kind of got to decide, hey, I take all the good area, you get the crap. So the peasants had to work the community land together and create under feudalism, the peasants had to work their community land together and then give some tribute to the landlord and for letting them exist. But instead, basically, the Tsar kept that system, but instead they would keep their community land and ideally divide the crops amongst themselves.
Because I was wondering on having when they were saying too much land, I was thinking back in America, what was happening was, they were moving, out west and they kept getting land, but they couldn't work the land. And then when they wanted to do the railroad, they were just taking all that farmland from everyone. So it was they couldn't work the land that they had because they just had too much land and no one to work it.
Oh no! In Russia, that problem was solved by giving, whenever there was land grants given to people, there were always in Russia you can give infants any there's so much land. That's why that land was not valuable. It's only when it was populated with serfs who were bound to the land, that's when it was an actual gift.
Okay.
So they solved that problem by always giving lands populated that had serfs in them.
Yeah, as long as they had the cheap labor, then the
land is worth something. Okay, so basically, I was reading a book. So then the kulaks were they were not serfs, but they were they were people who would lend to the big producers. Basically, they take the stuff to the big producers to the markets. But then when serfdom was officially abolished, there were some of these people who would lend to the big producers who realized, hey, there's a new market. So they would so the kulaks didn't actually have that much land for themselves. What they did have is the farm. So So when serfdom was abolished, the peasant didn't have anything. Like he did not have a plow. He did not have a cow.
Yeah.
So the kulaks would have the plows and the cows, and they would rent it out at usurious rates. And then at that point, when basically eventually the peasant would crash, and then they would take that peasant land for themselves, and that's how they got land.
Okay. All right.
Yeah. Let's see if there's any questions, comments, topics, banter.
Final Forest is listening to us a little late, so.
We'll comment and we may answer. So yeah, and that's why the kulaks were seen as like usurious, because and often
they were like middlemen.
No, they were like loan sharks, basically.
Yeah. Well, he uses the word sharks.
So it's like, hey, I will rent you a cow, but then you have to give me one exchange was cow for corvée labor, or plow for like 3 weeks of your son, like renting your son for 3 weeks. Another form is just like a really big percentage of the crops you yield.
Yeah. It's kind of like how my dad got a ride-on mower, and because he wanted to keep mowing the lawn, but he doesn't use it. So my neighbor likes using the ride-on mower. So I let her use the ride-on mower for her lawn because she will mow my lawn.
Yeah, exactly. But then, kind of. Yeah.
But then I'm making out more too, because then I'm like charging her more.
Yeah.
For her labor or something.
Exactly. And then basically, they would. So they basically kept the sometimes in literal debt bondage, and sometimes extremely usurious debt bondage with the peasant.
Yeah. I mean, it's just it just amazes me talking like I getting more and more into like having conversations on these lives on TikTok, and you get like a lot of the ANCAPs, and they just
liquidation of kulaks is genocide.
Yeah.
And you're like, no, that's like outlawing usury is what they mean.
Yeah. So, I mean,
kulaks are not, like, it's funny. Somebody once tried to say the Soviet Union tried to commit genocide against Cossacks. And it's like, you don't know what a Cossack is. A Cossack was like a mercenary on horseback who would kill
peasants. Yeah, just killing people.
Like disobeying peasants. Like they were meant to, like they were hired to put down peasant rebellions. They're not a race.
Mm-hmm. And this too, like I like this piece because he like kind of describes like the making of the middle class outside of like the United States is a little different development because of enslaved peoples and stuff like that, but like him describing how the middle class was kind of coming about too. I think that was in the section 7.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, in the United States, the middle class was mainly created after World War II as a fake middle class.
Yeah, it's completely fake.
Yeah, I mean, during the Great Depression, they were basically poor and rich.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like I grew up, so like I say that like I was, you're in middle class, and like even at times like my cousins who had a little less money had a little bit more, my oldest cousin had cerebral palsy, and
cerebral palsy. Okay, yeah.
So they they struggled a little bit, because she was a nurse, he was a teacher, and then like in my family, I had my dad was an engineer and my mom was a teacher, and I just remember like I was thinking about this, like a conversation with my cousins when we were young, and they were like, "You're upper middle class and we're lower middle class." I'm like, think so. I think we're like on the same level, but like,
yeah, I mean, the middle class is such a BS class. There's like proletariat, there's bourgeoisie. Yeah.
Yeah. The middle class is basically
I mean, if you're not making the billions, like 60,000 versus 80,000, it's like
it doesn't matter. Yeah.
When compared to the billionaires.
Yeah. If you don't have $1 million salary at this point, like, are you even?
I know.
Are you not struggling? Because they're saying even in the United States right now, 500,000 people.
Depends on where you live. Like in San Francisco, rent like for like a little closet costs $4,000 a month.
Yeah.
So then you have these tech bros who are making 100,000, but they're barely affording their rent. Yeah.
Right, so what is Daryl saying? I'll put it up here. That is the annoying thing about forced collectivization discourse. Liberals do not understand that if 1,000 cows are entrusted to the community, you gain 900 cows. For most, you gain a full 1,000.
Well, also the thing is that under Tsarist Russia, each peasant did not have his square of land that he farmed. There, like all the peasants had this land, but the profits went to the landlord.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the collectivization didn't really change the inner workings of the farm, because you can't really farm a little square. You need the big tracts of land that they all work together. Mm-hmm. So only thing it changed is who took the profits of the grain produced by the peasants.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah,
so the first production.
And in the U.S. During the Dust Bowl, collectivization happened, but it happened under Monsanto-ish.
The production of the means of the production for the means of production. What was that line?
So yeah, the first collectivization discourse is really idiotic. Yeah. Because I mean, it wasn't forced to most people because most people wanted that. It was the only people were like the kulaks, and then the former aristocracy that were forced to collectivize.
Yeah. Yeah.
So in my book, there's a chapter. So let me bring you this book. It's called. This is an autobiography written by a Soviet journal called "Believer to the End," where he talks about how they basically what they did is the minute they heard of the Bolshevik Revolution, the village itself.
Oh no, we lost Esha. That was weird. I'll hold on for a minute or two to see if she comes back. Let me just let her know. Oh, here she is.
What happened to me?
I don't know. You just like disappeared. I'm telling you.
Then they went to the big. So they just went to the big bourgeoisie's house with their guns, and then they're like, "Okay, we own this land now."
Yeah.
And then he had this big palace, and then they converted the palace into a school for children, and another section of the palace. They were like, "Okay, you can live here in this palace, but we're gonna take over this palace to build for a school for all the children." And this part is going to house the homeless refugees from World War I. And that's it. So the only person that was forced there was the big landlord.
Yeah, yeah. I hear a storm coming in, so that might be why things have been a little funky. I don't know.
Yeah, and it's surprising like how much work was done by the local communities themselves without the involvement of like some evil Soviet from above. So there was this factory in Vladivostok where this guy basically embezzles some money and he gets really drunk off of it and he gets caught. So the factory workers themselves form like a factory court, and then they have like 3 punishments, which is he gets dismissed, or because he's a drunk idiot, he gets to continue working, but the wage goes like he doesn't get the salary anymore. It's paid to his wife. And so they decide on the second option, which is they'll let him continue to work, but because he's a drunk idiot, all the money, his wife comes every Friday to pick up the salary.
Yeah. Yeah.
So a lot of this was done just by the local communities, but for people if you grew up as a rich bourgeois, like a rich landowner, you must think that these peasants are beneath you, or these workers are beneath you, so they can't imagine that them being smarter or being able to handle all the stuff by themselves. So that's why they're like authoritarian. They're being brainwashed by Stalin in order to not, because they don't want to be slaves. And it's like, they always didn't want to be slaves, and there was nothing that Stalin did. They just like their life.
People can think for themselves, and they want to think for themselves. And I mean, it's just amazing how much like I love the other ANCAP thing is I was like, but you decided to do that job, so how is it like wage slavery if you signed on to do that? Because I want to freaking eat.
I know, exactly. And you didn't really decide. Yeah, it's really no. They have this conception of free contract, which doesn't really exist unless it's between, say, Microsoft and Google. With most people, there's an implicit amount of coercion, so it's not that. So it's not. I mean, people don't choose to be minors or whatever; they have to do it, and it's about the working conditions after they have to do it.
All right, Daryl is saying collectivization exponent. I know what the word is, and I can't say it. Exponentially. Yeah, I probably can't look at it. Exponentializes collectivization, industrialization multiplies. It does not subtract. People are doing the math wrong.
Well, yeah, because if okay, so I mean, in like 1917, the Soviets only gave 17% profit on grain. The poor, yeah. So with the collectivization, basically, instead of hoarding the grain, they would put it out to market, and the entire community would get the increased returns.
Yeah.
Because you didn't have the speculators deciding, hey, I'll put only half to market and then wait until next year.
Yeah, because that's the whole thing. Like, they can take, like, if you have a capitalist, they they're taking the risk. No, they're doing what they want with your money, with your the profit that they made off of you and stuff, and then like you have no say in it. So yeah, like
yeah. And then with the collectives, they had they had built like schools like in old farmhouses. It was really cool. Yeah.
Yeah, and because you're now a collective, so you care about the community all having education, all being fed. Like you care more about who you're collectivizing with too. You know what I mean? Because you want a healthy collectivization. So you want everyone to be healthy.
And another rumor is like, and then the gulags were deported to Siberia. That's not what happened. Basically, if you were caught like exterminating the entire village because you were upset you only got 12% profit on your grain, what happened is that before, under the Soviet Union, if you needed to find a new collective form, the government would be like, go talk to the farm on your behalf and ask them to accept you, and they'd be like, sure. But if you're caught like exterminating the entire village because you're upset at the profit, the government was like, okay, go away. You have to go find your own farm. And so then if they went to their own farm, they'd ask, okay, so what happened to your old farm? It's like, oh, I just killed everyone there because I was upset about the, then they're not going to accept them. But the only farms that would accept them were in Siberia because they had a shortage of labor. So it's basically the government would stop like babying you if you were caught like doing all the atrocities the kulaks did.
Yep. So, what do you have anything else you want to talk about today, or?
Nope. Right. Okay. With that, let's see you next week. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.